everyone. It has been a little while since the last upload, but that's because we've been caught up to most of our content, which is awesome. But we're about to not be caught up anymore. We keep reading that book, and the book keeps introducing new things. And the next big new thing is a new tense, and it is always a good and an important and a big day when we learn a new tense. And the next one is the future tense, as you can probably guess by the presence of the words future tense verbs directly beside my head. Now, conceptually, this is a real easy tense, but I'm going to be honest, this is my least favorite one to do. Like I said, the concept part's easy. I mean, this is just in English when we say will to indicate that whatever our verb is hasn't happened yet. That's pretty simple. I don't think anyone's going to have, major struggles with understanding that the future hasn't happened yet and that we say that with will. What I hate about it, that you can already see glimpses of around me, is that there are two different ways of doing it in Latin. It depends on what conjugation your verb is. So I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible, even though essentially I'm teaching you two future tenses. I mean, they're the same tense. You translate them in the same way, but there's two different ways it could look. All right? So to start off with, let's do the easier of the two and the first of the two, arbitrarily speaking. The first and second declension. All right? Now, the future tense is part of the not the perfect system. The future tense is part of the present system, right? We have present system, perfect system. So it's part of the present system, which means it's based on the present stem. So it's going to look a lot like the present or the imperfect. In fact, for these verbs, it's going to look extremely like the imperfect. You start off with the present stem, you add bi. There's going to be some variance there, but it'll be fine. And then you add your endings. Same personal endings that we have added to pretty much all of our verbs. So if we want to see an example of this, I put up the first conjugation verb, lacrimo, lacrimare. We definitely know it's a first conjugation verb because there's an a here in the infinitive. That's how you can tell. Lacrimare is a first conjugation verb, and the use of that a is basically telling us that our present stem is lacrima. So when I did my future tense table here, I put lacrima in everywhere. All right, that's the part that actually carries the meaning of this verb, which in the case of lacrimare means to cry or to weep. And then I added my future tense endings to the end of that present stem. So like I said, it's a bi. Well, it's sort of a bi. In the first person, it's actually a bo, and in the third person plural, it's actually a bu. But otherwise, it's a bi. So lacrima bo, lacrima bis, lacrima bit, lacrima bimos, lacrima bitis, and lacrima bunt. All right? So when we translate this, we add, our personal subjects, and we add the will in there. What we end up with is, I will cry, you will cry, he, she, it will cry, we will cry, you all will cry, they will cry. All right? That seems simple enough. And it's the same if you were dealing with a second conjugation verb. If you need to see one just to be sure, here's one. Fleo fleare. It's one of my favorite verbs just because I think it sounds pretty. It means to cry or to weep. No, I'm not repeating myself on accident. It's actually another verb that means more or less the same thing as lacrima, lacrimare. They just happen to have two words for this, and they are in two different conjugations, the first and the second. And we know this is a second because there's an E before the RE, and it's a strong E, strong enough that it also shows up in front of the O. And if you're reading a book, like our textbook that has long marks, there will be one above that E. So I do the same thing. I take my present stem, which is fle, and then I just add bo, bis, bit to the end of it. Flebo, flebis, flebit, flebimos, flebitis, and flebunt. I will weep, you will weep, he, she, it will weep, we will weep, you all will weep, they will weep. If this was as easy as the future tense was all the time, I wouldn't stress about it. I would be like, great, future tense. In fact, I actually think this is simple enough that I don't super understand why we wait so long to learn it on these grounds alone. In fact, the textbook I learned from, which is different from the one that those of you who are actually in my class are reading from, actually teaches it at the exact same time as the imperfect, because these bo, bis, bit forms look a lot like the bom, bos, bot forms. They're pretty easy to learn at the same time because they're so similar. So you just want to make sure you don't get those mixed up. What makes it hard, though, what is annoying about the future tense, is not the first and the seconds. Those are pretty easy. It's the thirds and the fourths. Always the thirds, right? I mean, whether you're talking about nouns or verbs, for some reason, it's always the third one where Latin is really throwing a monkey wrench into the system and making your life just that much harder. Because you see, when you make a third conjugation verb or a fourth conjugation verb future, you're not going to add a bo bis bit, which is nice and convenient and easy to recognize. Instead, it's still going to be based on the present stem, still present system. But instead of adding letters to it, you're actually just going to change the vowel that you use. And then you're going to add endings. So I put plus a vowel change here, but you're not actually going to be adding any additional letters really. To get an example of that, here's a verb that we've actually been seeing kind of a lot for where we are in our textbooks right now, if you're watching this at the time that I uploaded it. All right, discero, discedere means to leave or to depart. And we know it's a third conjugation verb because it's got an E before its RE, but a weak one, a short one, right? The E does not show up in front of the O. And if you're reading a book like ours with long marks, there is not a long mark above that E. And so if we were doing this in the present tense, because that E is weak, we wouldn't actually use it when we conjugate. We'd use an I instead, right? It would be discedo, discedis, discedit, etc. But in the future, we are going to use an E. We're essentially going to like lengthen and beef up that vowel a little bit, which is kind of weird because then in the first person, instead of an O, we're going to get an AM, discedam. But then everywhere else where you didn't get to use E's in the present, you will use E's in the future. And this is why it was so important that you not use E's before. If you were thinking like, why does it really matter if I misspell my third conjugation verbs with an E instead of an I? This is why. It changes the tense of the verb. It actually changes what it ends up meaning. If you put an E in the ending of this instead of an I, it's not going to mean, he or she departs. It's going to mean he or she will depart. All right? And in terms of translating this in English, you still translate it with a will. The annoying thing, though, is that they are a little harder to recognize. When you see something like discedent, if you don't already realize that it's a third conjugation verb, you might think that it's, like a second conjugation present, when in fact it is a third conjugation future. It's another reason why knowing these verb conjugations, like which pattern they fall into, becomes real important. Now, it's a little bit better, as in not quite as bad for fourths and third IOs. You're still going to use the same stem, like the same vowel change at the end of your stem. The only reason why it's not quite so bad is in the case of fourths and third IOs, the I that you get in the infinitive hangs around, and it helps distinguish it from the present. So you're not just changing the I that was in there before, you're adding the s, et to it. In the present, this would have been ferio, feris, ferit, and here it becomes feriam, feries, feriet. All right? So this would be like, I will strike down, you will strike down, he, she, it will strike down, etc. And it's the exact same for a third IO, like fugio to flee, okay? Where you would have had fugio, fugus, fugit, you get fugiam, fugies, fugiet, all right? I will flee, you will flee, he, she, it will flee, etc. Okay? I know that's pretty faster than some of these other verb videos, but I didn't want to take too long on this. We will be talking about this in class as well. So hopefully you're watching this and getting ready for us to talk about that in class, or hopefully you're watching this later and getting some good reminders and reviews on how the future tense works. Again, real easy to interpret when you know it's future, but there are two different patterns you have to account for. So do your best with it, and as always, ask questions if you have them.